Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the brain and the nervous system. This can get a little bit boring over time, so obviously I hope that you can stay with me and navigate through the entire PowerPoint. That would be really great. Okay, so let's get started. To get started today, just to kind of grab your attention, we're going to do a quick Google form quiz. It's a would you rather. And so you can go ahead and take that right now. Pause this video. I want you to take it like before we start the lesson. You can either scan the QR code with your phone or you can type this URL into the browser, but please pause this video for the purpose of taking that. Okay, so hopefully by now you have taken that Google form quiz and you noticed it was extremely easy. It was just asking you between two options, which one would you rather have? Basically, during that activity, what you were doing was you were given two options and you're thinking, which one of these would I rather do? Would I rather be stepped on by a horse or would I rather be thrown by a gorilla, right? And so you kind of had to process that information in your mind and you had to think, well, if I got stepped on by a horse, this would happen. If a gorilla threw me, this would happen. And so you had to think about which one you would rather do. I'm actually really excited to see your responses to those, by the way. Anyway, so obviously there was a decision-making process happening. And the reason that we are talking about decision-making process is because when it comes to drugs and using drugs and trying drugs, we are doing the same similar process. Just like you were sitting there and you were processing information, you were saying, okay, yep, I'm going to choose this. When you're choosing to do drugs, you're doing the same thing. So there are four lobes of the brain. The first one is the frontal lobe. That's the one that's the most important, especially when we're talking about choosing to use drugs and things like that. And that's because the frontal lobe is in control of our decision making. It also is in control of other things like our movement, planning, problem solving, behavior control, and things like that as well. Obviously, behavior control could be related to drugs too. The next is the parietal lobe. This is in charge of senses like pressure and touch. Also has to do with language and attention. Next is occipital. It's actually in the back part of your head. It is responsible for sight, so vision. And then the next one is temporal, which is easy to remember because it's right here on your temples, temporal lobe. And this has to do with language comprehension and visual recognition as well. There's also two chemicals of the brain I want to talk about. The first one is serotonin. You probably heard of serotonin before when people are talking about like sleep and your serotonin levels and stuff like that. Serotonin plays a role in sleep and depression. It also has to do with appetite, arousal, and mood as well. There's also a second chemical in your brain that's called dopamine. If you've ever heard of the phrase like, that's so dope, like that's so cool. The reason that I kind of use that to help me remember is because dopamine is associated with pleasure and reward. So when you try that drug, if you get any pleasure, obviously from engaging in doing that drug, then that is also having to do with dopamine in the brain as well. Now I want to talk about the two divisions of the nervous system. The first division is the central nervous system. It is obviously the center of your body. You've got your brain, you've got your spinal cord, okay? The second division of the nervous system is the peripheral nervous system. And how I like to remember this is like talking about like peripheral vision. You know, if somebody's like walking past you in like your side view and you can kind of see them even though you're looking straight. Peripheral nervous system kind of is functioning in the same way. It's those nerves that connect the brain and spinal cord to the other areas of your body, like your hands, your feet, your leg, and everything like that. Now, not to get too confusing because I have talked about a lot so far and it can be confusing if you haven't learned it before, but there's also two divisions of one of the two divisions of the nervous system, okay? Don't get too confused, but I do want to talk about it. So we have the central nervous system, your brain and spinal cord, but we also have your peripheral nervous system, which is obviously those nerves that are expanding out. There are two types of divisions of the peripheral nervous system. The first one is the somatic, and what the somatic does is it carries sensory information. So in order for me to go through the buttons on this lesson, I have to literally press the button and click to the next slide. So I click this and the next thing pops up. Obviously, I don't have to think much about that, but there is still sensory information that's being processed in my brain for my brain to tell my body to push that button. So that's your somatic. Those are those sensory things that are happening. Then we have the autonomic nervous system. And how I like to remember this is automatic, autonomic, automatic. And these are the things that happen automatically. So for example, like your heart beating. You don't have to tell your heart to beat. It just does that. Digesting food. You don't have to say, hey, belly, make sure you're digesting that food. Your body just does those things naturally. I'm not going to play the video because I don't feel like it. Okay. Now I want to talk about neurons. So basically what neurons are is they are how our body and our brain communicate with other areas of our body in our nervous system. So if something happens, like I'm touching a hot frying pan, how my brain communicates to my body that that thing I touched was just hot was because when I touch it and it's hot, my neurons are communicating with each other. Okay. So I'm going to kind of explain the different pieces of the neuron, and then I'm going to play a video that kind of gives you a better visual. So kind of just bear with me. The first one is the dendrite. The dendrite in a neuron is these branch-looking things. Do you see these branches? Okay. The dendrite are the branch-looking things. And what dendrites do is they receive messages. So they'll receive the message. So I touch that hot frying pan. Something is burning me. Ow. The dendrite receives the message saying, hey, this is hot. Then we have the axon. You can't necessarily see the axon in detail. Do you see these little yellow things? They are not the axon. They are the thing covering the axon. So the axon is actually this purple thing that goes all the way through. You just can't necessarily see it because it is covered up. So even though you only see these little tiny purple things, the axon actually goes all the way down. Okay, so that's the axon. We've got the dendrite receives the message, and then we have the axon. The axon sends the message. So the dendrite receives it, and it gives it to the axon, and the axon sends that message off. Now, it's important to know these little yellow things that I was just talking about that are covering the axon, that's called myelin sheath. And what the myelin sheath does is it protects the axon. So you can see the little yellow things. That is a protection of the axon so that the message can travel in a clear way. Now, when we choose to do things like drugs, what happens is the myelin sheath gets damaged, and so then the axon cannot send that message correctly. So, okay, for example, I'm touching something really hot, and the message is trying to send saying, hey, bro, that's hot. If the myelin sheath is damaged, then it's going to take longer for my brain to process that information and tell my hand, get your hand off of that. Okay. I want to show you this video. I'm not going to show you the whole thing, just the portion of it, just so you can kind of see how the neurons communicate with each other, because you're only looking at a single neuron. But I want you to understand the dendrite, the axon, then it goes to the bottom of the axon called the axon terminal, and then it communicates with a new neuron until that message is sent through. So I'm going to be fast forwarding till I find the part I want you to see. Okay, so here it is. This is the neuron getting observed. And it's going to explain the three components that I just talked about. You have the cell body. I didn't really talk about that. But then you have the dendrites. Those are those branch-looking things. You have the axon. You can see how it goes all the way down, like I said. So you can see Do you see how it goes all the way down? This little thing on the outside, these little things right here, that's the myelin sheath. The axon is still in the middle.
Oh.
Here we go. Now you're going to see how the different neurons communicate with each other. So the dendrites receive the message, passes it to the cell body, and then it's sent off to the axon. It goes all the way down the axon, and it's going to another neuron. So right here is a synapse. I'll talk about that in a minute. But here is the end of the first neuron. And you can see here where this neuron is communicating with the second neuron to send that message until it is like complete. And boom. Now we're back to the top of his head. Do you see? Now this is a new neuron where at the top of his head you can see the dendrites. Going down the axon. Boom. This is called an axon terminal. The message is exchanged to a new neuron. Boom. Back up to the top, the dendrites. Axon terminal. And then boom, after a couple of different things have been sent away, now you can see that the message is sent to the brain after we pass through a couple neurons. So then the message is finally delivered to the brain. And then the brain's like, oh, okay, this is popcorn, not a cookie, because at the beginning he went to go grab a cookie and instead he grabbed popcorn. But anyway, so now you can see kind of how they travel within each other. How I like to remember it about dendrites and axons, this is so stupid, but if you've ever seen the show Dr. Oz, I just say Dr. Az instead of Dr. Oz. Dendrites receive doctor. Dendrites receive messages. Axons send messages. Dr. Az. And then I kind of discussed, like in that video, the synapse that was happening. So you could see where the two neurons, where the end of one neuron and the beginning of one was kind of communicating with each other. And that was called a synapse. And these are where the messages and chemicals are exchanged. I did kind of want to make a comparison for myelin sheath. So has this ever happened to anyone's charger? Absolutely, yes. I'm sure this has happened, especially if you have an iPhone where part of it is kind of getting torn up and it's not really sending the message or charging the phone like it used to. So what happens when this happens? If you have an iPhone, you're very aware. What happens is it goes charging, not charging, charging, not charging, charging, not charging. It's like green, off, green, off, green, off, green, off, and your phone's not charging. You're like, oh, this charger sucks, like it's not working. What happens is there is a delay in the message being sent. So the cords are trying to send the message, right? And it's not being sent because there is damage. This is similar to the myelin sheath on an axon. So the myelin sheath protects the axon when the message is sent, just like this white part of the iPhone charging cord protects the wires inside so that that message can be shared effectively. So obviously you can kind of see the comparison there. Basically what I'm trying to communicate is, okay, the myelin sheath is damaged. The message is sent slower or not at all. And when we choose to use drugs, it has an impact on that myelin sheath and the messages are not sent as successfully. Okay, so in class, sadly, obviously we're not in class, you would create a neuron. So I would give you Play-Doh, and then with one partner, you would make a neuron with dendrites and nucleus and axon, a myelin sheath, and axon terminal. It's actually very helpful because some of you will not separate the myelin sheath from the axon, even though I feel like I stressed that enough, that the myelin sheath is just the coating that's protecting it. But what you're going to do is you are going to do something a little bit different. So if you go to your assignment tab for this class, you will go to the brain or nervous system. And then right here it says check for understanding. Go to the website MadNeuron and complete the game. Now, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to turn my volume off. I'm going to tell you that in order to do this game, you need a Adobe Flash Player. If you don't have it, I recommend just downloading it because you'll learn a lot more from doing this game than anything else. However, if you don't have the Adobe Flash Player, then I have an alternate assignment for you to do. This one's better, in my opinion, and easier, but to each their own. So if your Adobe Flash is not working, I'll talk to you about what you'll do. But what you're going to do is you're basically a scientist in his lab, and you are just going to make a neuron. So here he gives you all the parts for his neuron, and you are going to lay them out on the table and basically make one neuron. Once you complete the one neuron, then you'll make the second neuron that communicates with the first one you made. So like I talked about, you saw the end of the dendrites. So you went dendrites down the axon terminal, or axon to the axon terminal, and then it communicated back at the top. You'll basically be completing two, but you'll do one first. He tells you what to do. You'll figure it out. During it, if you click on this computer, it literally tells you like how to make it. Like, so you can reference it. If you're like, oh, I forget, click on this computer. And here you see the dendrites, the cell body, the nucleus, down the axon to the axon terminal. And then another one would be placed there. So you'll do this. When you complete it, just take a screenshot showing me that it's done. He'll tell you when you're done, and then you'll get points. If you do not have Adobe Flash, there is this assignment. If you click here, you can complete this assignment. You do need to earn a 100% before you submit it for points, though. Okay, so hopefully you guys kind of understand more about the brain and the nervous system and how the frontal part of our brain is responsible for decision making, and that's why we might make the decision to try drugs. And then also our nervous system and how we have neurons that communicate with each other. And if we do drugs, then those messages aren't able to be communicated as effectively as they would be. Sorry that this video is so long, but I guess you're going to have to get used to it anyway because we're going to be all online soon. So hopefully you learned something. Have a great rest of your day. Email me if you're having problems.